Thank you, Dr. Garg. Yesterday, somebody was talking about the trust deficit between the private sector and the consumers. And as a chairman of one of the regulatory commissions, I would like to add that deficit is definitely there and it is widening. And therefore, it is also a challenge for the private sector how to overcome that deficit. That is also going to be very important. Many projects which have been taken under the Section 62 under the MOU route. Many consumer organizations today are complaining that the prices have gone very high, unsustainable for the consumers. So that is also a challenge which I think the private sector will have to face and overcome. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Manish Agarwal, Mr. Manish Agarwal, who is the head of the Energy and Natural Resources, KPMG in India. KPMG is involved with several lead private players as well as several of the regulatory commissions and also the distribution companies. So I would like to hear his perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman of the session. I think after hearing all the speakers before me around this, I'm not going to repeat some of the problems which has been articulated quite well, what we are facing. Let me, step back a little, and try to put sort of a perspective, drawing upon, what Mr. Devdutt said in the morning session. Who are the key stakeholders here? You have utilities on one hand, you have regulators on another, you have policy makers, which is whether the government or the state government bodies that we're talking about, we have private developers, and we have consumers. I think the problem to my mind is that the four stakeholders, leaving apart the consumers, which today doesn't have much of a voice or a say, is probably trying to put a perspective that they are the only sufferers, and therefore what they are trying to articulate is the only solution or a way forward. And I think the solution lies somewhere in between to my mind. From a private developer side, I think while I tend to agree with a lot of policy flips which the government has done over the years, I remember there was a time when there was an integrated energy policy we came out with. We advertised and encouraged people to set up a gas-based power plants, and then we suddenly found a lot of stranded capacity. Today, pendulum has gone in the other extreme. Then we are talking only solar, and I agree completely with the point Mr. Kavle said, completely ignoring hydro, which probably is a much better resource. It's not a question of which is a better resource, it's a question of energy security and affordable price from a country perspective, and putting every resource into a perspective so that our energy requirements are met, rather than one resource at the cost of another. So what we do, unfortunately, in Indian context is that we go after one resource at a point in time, which is a flavor of a day, rather than looking at a very integrated policy perspective. And that's the one biggest problem that is probably manifesting in various things that we are seeing today. I think I'm in the private sector side. I think again, my different perspective from there is, if you try to make a supernormal profit, if you try to make your returns in 3 years against a 25 years period, what this asset is about, or an infra asset as a regulated asset class, I think there is bound to be a problem when somebody will say that, look, stop here, this is not working out in a sustainable model. The kind of money that a merchant power plants made, and Harry, you referred to that in those era, I think that was a time which was just a matter of a concern that when it manifested itself and the sector turns to a different extreme. You may say that a problem is of a vacillating between extremes, but it leads to, those supernormal scenarios lead to a different extreme. I think we had a situation where a first-time entrepreneurs who have not set up or done even 100 megawatts, trying to create a 5,000 megawatts, 10,000 megawatt portfolio, completely underestimating the execution risk, relying on a Chinese equipment, Indonesian coal, without estimating what the delays, clearances, the lead investment cycles are, and what is going to happen on the domestic linkage side. So I think some part they have to also bear a responsibility for what the sector is going through today. I think all the conversations that I hear is about utility should be doing X, which is right, policymaker should be doing Y, but what should I do as a developer as well? And I think the solution, and I will just focus on what solution to my mind is, and this classic debate that we are going, which the government has to understand, a new capacity versus a stranded assets. I mean, from a country perspective, I really don't know. While we are announcing a UMPPs, we are trying to announce 100 gigawatts of a solar and 550 to 6 rupees of a tariff, where the distribution companies is sitting on accumulated losses. You go to any investor, talk overseas, the first question that comes to my mind is, in their mind is, where is the paying capacity of the sector as a whole, right? So the first issue that we have to really say that is the country better off investing in the new capacity and really forgetting about what to do with the stranded assets today, which has a larger implication on the banking side as well, because if that gets choked, there is no funding which is going to be available as well, right? So I think, to my mind, this debate versus stressed assets and a new capacity is something which we have to fundamentally address. Unless and until we do that part, we are not going to really solve this problem and shifting the blame from one to another. Few issues to my mind is very important. If we need, I mean, there are investors who are willing to come to India. People believe power is a sector where they can invest in. India is a consuming market and the power requirements will be huge. However, the international investors or any investors who want to come in doesn't want to take a fuel risk, doesn't want to take a procurer risk. I think these are the two basic fundamental and the tenets we have to understand if we really want to solve the problem. Now, fuel issue, I mean, on the coal side, yes, we have seen a perceptible improvement in terms of our increase in the production. We are talking about that. So I think, to my mind, that's a slightly lesser of a problem. The problem is more what you do with the PPAs, which has already entered into, which I think Mr. Maru also pointed and highlighted out. And I think, to my mind, and there has to be a scenario where everybody makes a sacrifice there. There is no way, if we just say the utilities has to increase the tariff, regulator has to increase the tariff, and the developers are not going to make a compromise on the return expectation of that. And to my mind, therefore, some of the issue that we have to really understand from our utilities and regulators have to appreciate is that if there is a natural change in law from the time the bids were made, if there's a natural change in the deficit in the coal linkage, which was promised to by the government entity rather than my commercial decision, or which I based on my private contracts, there is a reasonable justified case for getting a tariff increases done. Now, whoever is at a fault, but if the tariff is not to a viable level, or we take years to go into the regulatory cycle, it's not going to address the stress assets problem. So I think we have to really sit together as all stakeholders to say that if I really make the tariff increases done, if I get you a PPA and FSA so that that asset can become online, what is that developer will sacrifice from the return perspective so that every stakeholder is putting something to table to make that capacity work. I think unless and until we start talking like that, or we just put a blame that a regulator is a problem because he's not clearing the process, or utilities is a problem because they go to regulator and file a case everywhere, I don't think we are going to have any problem around this particular solution. And this is, to my mind, is the biggest concern that a sector is sitting on, because once NPA becomes, the banks are not going to lend for the new capacity. And once the lending stops, there is no investment for the new capacity either. So, and which may lead to a scenario where what we are talking of tariffs, and the today government is very comfortable, 3 years down the line, you have not invested in new capacity, you have not invested in getting the existing capacity on the system. The economic growth is fortunately in an upswing, so you need more of a power and energy, and you are sitting on a situation where you have a high deficits and you end up ending high tariffs. So I think we have to really think about that scenario and trying to work on that basis. Thank you very much.